Let's begin with our fourth and final panel of the day. As we started out this program, there was always going to be too creative, too technology, because in the sort of all the annals of Mixed Magazine, from the very beginning, that's been the goal. It's a combination of technical excellence and creativity all across the board, and that's sort of what drives this industry as I do it. And today, we've understood that this creates a lot of different workflow issues. There's a lot of tools being built. It's a technology still in its infancy. So we are ending with technology and workflow, something very important I'm certainly every facility owner, every creative out there is concerned about. There has been one change to our panel today, sponsored by Fairlight. You see that. We brought in, because they have been so involved in making tools and such throughout the world, really, probably even more so than we often hear about in the United States through the East Asian stuff. We brought in Tim Cuthbert's in there in the middle and replaced Tom McCarthy. Tom McCarthy, who has driven this entire event, will come on at the end and say a few closing remarks for us. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, once my longtime competitor at Pro Sound News, and now... Then he bought us. And that's good. It's okay for Frank to live with that illusion. So that's fine. But Frank Wells, longtime industry, very much technology and creative guy. And facilities in and around Nashville with a background that goes back into radio and all kinds of stuff. But Frank Wells, a man I respect in this industry immensely. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. All right. We have a good group of folks gathered for you here. We're going to talk technology. We're going to talk the implications of technology for the tools for immersive audio, and maybe where we're going to find a few of where the holes are, and some tools that are needed, or some further communications and further standards, and some ways that we can take this further and make the interoperability smoother and find out what's going on. We've got a great group of people here to do that with, three that represent formats themselves, and that's from Dolby. Here we have David Gold from Dolby to my immediate left, and then we have Brian Slack from DTS next to him, and then next to the end we have Sven Mevison from Auro Technologies to talk about Auro-3D. So we have the three formats represented in those individuals, and then we have consoles, hybrid console technologies, and DAWs represented by, on the far end, Mark Lopez from Yamaha and Steinberg. And he flew in from Japan just for this event today. He says if anybody sees him fading on the end there, throw something his way. But we appreciate Mark joining us. And then Ben. We have Ben Loftus from Harrison, in one of my homeboys down near Nashville, in Laverne, Tennessee. But Harrison's consoles, if you've seen around this facility, permeate this facility. And someone asked Ben's colleague Gary Thielman, who is the sales head for Harrison, where their demo room was, and he said, "We spent 20 years building it. Walk into any room in the building." So they obviously have that represented. So between Tim Cuthbertson, again, sponsoring this program and representing Fairlight, and their workstation, Yamaha and Harrison, we have a good rounded panel here. So I wanted to start just real quickly, just hitting some of the hardware requirements for these tools. Obviously, we have consoles. We've got tools we're building into consoles. We've got tools that are being built into DAWs to control these things. Outboard hardware. David, we have outboard hardware required to be available for the Dolby system. And tell us what's exactly needed on that in a short word.
So the Dolby rendering and mastering unit, we're sort of jumping in, assuming that you all know a bit of what's going on. The Dolby Atmos system is built around this rendering and mastering unit, which is an external box that takes the audio signals in, it takes the metadata in, and does the rendering to your speaker configuration in your room. When we approached the initial problem of how are we going to, we've got this great idea, we've done all of this research, we've had all of this feedback about, channel-based systems not going far enough, wanting to move into more of an object-based world. Okay, how the hell are we going to do that? And we didn't really approach it from do we want a hardware solution, or do we want a software solution, or do we want a cloud solution, or do we want an analog solution, or whatever. We approached it more from what do we need to put in place to make this work and make this something that is feasible for our customers and for these people who want this capability. And it became pretty evident pretty quickly that it was a different enough technology that actually abstracting some of that technology from either the DAW or from the mixing console would make it much easier to integrate. Using standard network connectivity, standard MADI connectivity would mean that you could fit the RMU into a sort of a standard facility much more easily. So the RMU is a rendering and mastering unit that is provided by Dolby and is what actually does the rendering. It also provides the B chain, so it provides the EQ and all the room management, and is what then feeds your amps that feed your speakers. And that then will connect to your mixing client, be it a DAW or a mixing console, via an Ethernet connection for the metadata connection and the control. And then 128 channels of MADI feeds into that as well. So that just sits between the output of what you're doing and what feeds the speakers. It's controlled via a web UI. There's a monitor application which gives you all the metering and everything else. So from your DAW, you can see, you get a good view of what's going on and get to control that box remotely. But yeah, I just kind of want to be clear that it wasn't like a purposeful, oh yeah, we want to make a hardware-based solution because that would be better. It was much more about finding the solution that's going to cause the least disruption to the creative workflow.
Okay, and at the end of the chain too, at the cinema level, there's a kind of a reciprocal level to that box. And we talked a lot about the formats earlier in the day. I don't want to go too far over that.
And I think that's a good point, though. The renderer inside the rendering and mastering unit is mirrored exactly in the CP850, which is the cinema processor, which is what goes into a movie theater. And so that way, what you're mixing through is always the same renderer as what it's going to play back through when it's playing back through a CP850. So yeah, it's kind of the mirror image box that will stay in sync as they evolve.
Okay. And Sven, tongue firmly in cheek, tell us about your hardware that's required.
Well, first of all, we need a speaker setup. So 11.1 channels and appropriate number of speakers in a cinema. With the 3 layers, top channel and height layer and lower layer. And well, in order to be, for us, well, the DCI compliancy was very important. So we need to get our decoder technology implemented into the DCP server, like it's the case with the RME, in order to make sure that all the channels are watermarked and being played back in the cinema. Let me think. That's basically it.
And then for DTS, we're really talking about a bridge technology and a bridge format as opposed to the actual implementation solution itself.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, DTS, the MDA format is speaker agnostic, so the actual channel configuration in the room really is a completely separate entity from what we're doing. What we're implementing is an object-based mixing system that, again, like Dolby says, we're trying to design it to work into the existing workflow or modify the workflow in such a way to where it doesn't impact the creative intent or the process or the speed or the artistic endeavor that they're getting into. Rather, make it just a seamless integration into the workflow. That being said, once you're done with this, the renderer exists in software. We're currently doing it in Pro Tools as an AAX plugin. Obviously, Fairlight is doing it, QSC, USL. There are a number of partners who are doing the MDA renderers. The idea behind MDA is that it's a completely interoperable format, object-based format that can be played on any sound system, on any number of partners' hardware, but it's really the object-based portion of it that's our concern, and trying to make not necessarily more channels, although for the right venue and the right film, more channels may be beneficial, but to make the right channels, having the mix play back in any venue as closely as possible as the creative intent was originally made.
So you say it's Pro Tools only at this point?
No, Pro Tools and Fairlight, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as far as creation tools,
playback
tools, both QSE and their QSys system and USL have playback systems.
Or else Tim wouldn't have been demoing in your room earlier today. Exactly. Okay, and so Sven, your software control tools, plugin environment and such, what DAWs is it for and what does it entail?
Well, currently we are supporting Pro Tools on AAX 32 and 64-bit, just the technical detail. but we're also building them for VST and all the other plugin formats out there, basically. For us to develop these tools was a necessity in order to make 3D panning possible in today's DAWs. It's only, yeah, it's one part of how to produce and create content in Auro-3D, but we also are very happy about the integration of our technology, or at least the format and layout into large format consoles like Harrison and DFC need.
And David, it's a plugin for Pro Tools also, and
yeah, that's right. So we have a panel plugin for Pro Tools. Again, it's an AX 3264-bit, and then we also have integration again with large format consoles. We have integration with the Fairlight as well. So the Fairlight 3-door can talk directly to the RMU. The Harrison, the DFC, the System 5 all now have the 9.1 bed panning and the direct object integration as well.
And I'll come back to Nuendo in a minute, Mark, but I wanted to, are there any third-party software tools that are out there, or are hardware that is being developed specifically to integrate and work with you at this time?
Yes.
And what are those?
I can't say.
Okay. So
no, okay, sorry.
That's the in-development part.
Yeah, I mean, there are third-party, I mean, the Fairlight software is a third-party tools. I mean, the ecosystem is hugely important to us. And we are proactively working with many vendors. I mean, our first priority was to find a solution that would, open up the Pro Tools workflow. I think we can all agree that, in order to, especially in this town, in order to sort of get your foot in the door, you needed at least a solution that would work with Pro Tools. And then once that happened, the next priority was to really get large format traditional consoles working in a way that they could integrate. And, these things take time. It's not stuff that you can do overnight. And I think now that's actually all in a pretty good place, thanks to, the great partnerships that we've had with some of these manufacturers. And now we can start to grow the ecosystem beyond that in sort of interesting ways.
So are there any besides the people that are represented on this stage, are there any third parties? I think TC Electronic was mentioned as somebody that was doing something.
Exponential Audio, they released their Reverb, their 3D Link technology, which is another kind of workaround some of the current limitations within DAWs to give you some sort of three-dimensional reverberation. That's the only one that springs to mind. Right?
Anybody else know of any other third-party stuff besides?
Well, we're talking to various companies in getting our format in there. David mentioned Exponential Audio, for instance, and TC Electronics. That's essentially it right now, I guess. I mean, there are more and more coming, obviously.
All right, so Tim, tell us, Fairlight system is not really a DAW, it's kind of a hybrid of a console and a DAW and controller, and it's a workstation that handles all of those things, but where it's obviously not Pro Tools, so it's not in that direct camp. How do you how are you inserting yourself into the mix, Tim?
Thank you for that introduction. Just talk a little bit, and we feel like it's a manufacturer of digital audio workstations and control surfaces. So to address the hardware question a little bit, which is where you started, we do have hardware elements that have control and spatialization and panning attributes to them. So they've got...
if you've seen him wagging his finger around earlier today.
Yeah, that's not hardware. Oh, yeah. That's software. So we do have physical surface elements that are hardware that work over Ethernet controls to position, in an up-down XYZ, tilt, pan, rotate, sound or clips or objects in three-dimensional space. Also, as a part of the hardware, the core audio engine, let's call it, or processing engine, is doing the fundamental bus formatting and mixing for any object that is spatialized. The metadata gets written either to written back to potentially Pro Tools as a as a system into its automation lanes or into our own system or into, ultimately, in the other direction, into an RMU, where it's used to encode and give the spatialized information for positioning that sound in Dolby's Atmos encoding. The philosophy, or part of the philosophy behind Fairlight's implementation has been, or is, that really you should ultimately only mix once. The intent is to mix once, and the spatialization data can then be utilized to produce mixes in either the DTS MDA format, or in an Auro format, or in a DTS Dolby format, or for that matter, any of the fixed bus formats. The background for Fairlight's work in this area was in 2009 we were approached by NHK to do 22.2. And NHK happens to be a large customer of Verizon Broadcast. And the goal, even back in 2009, they were looking forward to the Olympics in 2020, where they had determined that all Olympic broadcasts were going to be 22.2, or that was their goal. And they asked us to do the spatialization or the immersive system for that 22.2. So the core R&D work was done some 5 years ago, and then subsequently we've expanded that into supporting the newer, if you like, the newer developments in both MDA and Atmos and Auro. So that's the background of where Fairlight sits. Certainly from a workstation standpoint, it runs native on our own systems. From a console standpoint, it would run native on our own consoles because it's the same platform. And from a plug-in standpoint, it'll run under any VST or RTAS plugin. So it could run on Nuendo at the end of that particular software tool suite can run on Nuendo or on Pro Tools version 10 something. So that's our position at the moment.
Okay, so Ben Loftus again representing Harrison. Again, the consoles that you've seen all around here. In an earlier session, Ben, they told us that the upgrades for the console to handle the immersive audio in the Holden Theater were $200,000. So I'm expecting you to either tell us a story about a new boat you bought or what they got there for.
I wish. I certainly wish. No, of course, that's a massive system. In fact, all of these consoles, I mean, it's easy to call it a console. Honestly, this part of our business, we don't even, if you look at our website, it doesn't say this is our console business. We make some analog consoles. We make digitally controlled analog consoles in the past. We make all kinds of things. These kind of consoles fall under what we call our enterprise class part of the business. And what that means is that we're doing custom development. We're solving today's problems today, in the sense that when you look at what DAWs are doing, they don't yet have native 3D panning because they have hundreds of thousands of users around the world. And many of them have millions of users around the world. And to adopt these features, which are completely useless to 99.999% of their users, takes a long time to trickle in. It has to become such a central part of everybody's workflow that they'll put it into a DAW that everybody has. Well, we have to solve these problems immediately. So when we started getting orders from customers for Atmos systems, compatible systems, and Auro compatible systems, of course, what we had to do is immediately develop that, and that's what we do. We develop hardware and software solutions to make things easy for how people want to work today. So, for example, in the room next door, that console, all of our consoles have always operated on what you might call an object-oriented basis, meaning that every channel has an X, Y, and Z position. There's a joystick that you can move around. It's motorized and touch-sensitive. It's a patent we've had for many, many years. And you can fly it around the room. And when you choose which buses you want to record to or which recorders you want to record to, that's when it decides how to render that. So it's been that way since our consoles have been that way ever since we started making digital consoles. In fact, our digitally controlled analog consoles work that way. So that means that you can render a mix. You can move a joystick up to the front center and then print a stereo pair for that sound. You can do an LCR. You can do a 5.1, you can do quad, you can do all the different formats that we've ever developed all throughout the year. So we can do the 11.1 Auro-3D formats, and of course we can also click a button, and instead of going through our panning engine to pan to 11.1, or to any of the other formats, we can send it out to the RMU to be panned in their box. And then we bring all those things back in. In the case of the RMU, we bring that signal back into the console, so it's treated through our monitoring system. And what that means is that when it's time to make your deliverables, these guys asked us to help them, instead of going through, with a plug-in based workflow, you have a problem. The plug-in will make you an 11.1 mix, and then you can push a button, it'll make you a 7.1 mix, and then you can push a button, it'll make a 5.1 mix. Well, the problem is you've got to make music, you've got to make your M&Es, all your deliverables, so you've got to make a music 5.1, and then you've got to make the dialogue 5.1, and then you've got to make the creatures 5.1, which is kind of like dialogue, but it's not going to be translated, so that's separate. And then you've got to make the background effects, and then the foreground special effects, and explosions and things. I mean, you guys know this way better than I do. But it ends up being a lot of tracks. And when you are doing that in a plug-in based workflow, you've got to have the plug-in render each one of those. You've got to make a pass for each one of those. And it's a sizable problem. In a facility like this, where they really have to take advantage of every workflow advantage they can, they take big consoles with lots of channels and lots of buses, and they try to do all that stuff in parallel. So that when you walk out of this building, there's all kinds of mixes made. And those kind of challenges are what those particular pieces of hardware are for. And yeah, they are a little bit expensive, but actually in the budget of that whole project, that was just a piece of the pie. I mean, that's a massive, undertaking over there.
All right. So, Mark, for your part, we've got these formats. They're making controllers that are in Pro Tools and such. Same kind of question I asked Tim. Obviously, you have a workstation, Nuage, which is taking Yamaha console technology and using it to directly control Nuendo in a very intuitive, and I think Nuendo hasn't been able to be controlled like you can now. No controller can give you that kind of power, but how do you apply that then to the immersive?
So, Nuendo, Yamaha and Steinberg have been working together for a long time, and Yamaha acquired, a lot of people don't know that Yamaha acquired Steinberg back in 2005, and our goal really was to take the best of Yamaha hardware and combine it with Steinberg software technology. So in the Nuage system that we're showing in the ADR1 room, basically Nuendo is the engine of the console. And our goal was to create a console experience using a workstation package. So there was a lot of development done on the software side, and a lot of our kind of console and hardware know-how was applied to the console side of it. The tricky part, of course, being when you have something as flexible as software, how do you not paint yourself into a corner in the hardware? So we think we did a very good job creating a modular system that leaves itself open to different technologies or options. So Nuage is a very modular system that all connects through Ethernet. Nuendo is the engine behind it. Now, as far as speak a little bit about Nuendo, it's a very extensible platform, meaning our developers have put a lot of kind of plug-in controls, not just for plugins, VST being a Steinberg technology, but for instance, the panner is a plug-in. There are plugins for the monitoring section, so that as new surround formats come out, it's easy for another developer to create a plugin for Nuendo. And Nuendo, just by all the years of different formats, it supports in its busing structure multiple types of 2D surround. It has a bus structure built in for the Auro. You can purchase the panner from Auro directly. But like a lot of the other workflows, you can basically, it'll capture the panning data and apply it to any of the busing structures. So if in version 6, you can, for instance, create a panning pass that will apply to stereo 5.1. There are some hooks in there for 3D. We haven't really announced anything, but we're working with several people to enhance our plug-in capability for 3D panning as well. So there's a lot happening right now that I can't talk about, but Nuendo is a very extensible application.
Okay, so for X, Y, and Z control, I just want to really quickly take a kind of a, how is everyone doing it? How are you getting Z, really? I mean, we can take a joystick, we can figure out that's just going to move around us at essentially eye level in that one thing, and we're going to get our X, Y that way. Where do we get Z? How do we get it in? How do we make it for the operator? And what kind of feedback visually and operationally are we providing for them? So metering and display-wise. So, go ahead.
Sure, it's kind of an interesting problem. You know, you've got, as you say, the whole XY thing is pretty easy, and everyone's used to panning with a joystick. But then you add the height dimension, and you know we've tried. You've put it on a separate joystick, but I don't know about you, but I don't have the dexterity to be a helicopter pilot and get the height right whilst I'm doing the X and Y. You can't put me in. And so we've looked at all sorts of things, and frankly, I think it's a really interesting question. I think there's no right answer, and I think there are a lot of people looking at this. It's like the hand wavy thing, Microsoft Kinect and those sort of things, or a Wii controller. How do you want to move things around? One of what, in hindsight, now seems like the simplest things that we did when we were first developing the plugin and working with mixers is we added what we're now calling auto elevation modes. Which are modes of operation for the Dolby Atmos Panner plugin that basically auto-generate your Z value based on X and Y. And we have a few different options. We have a sphere mode, we have a wedge mode, we have a ceiling mode, or we have a freeform mode as well. But the auto-elevation modes have actually been very, very helpful.
That turned out to be a really good idea.
Yeah, it did. And actually, it's interesting because, as I say, in hindsight, it seems so obvious.
Yeah, it does.
But it was one of these things that actually, some mixers suggested it. And it was like, oh, yeah, we could probably automate that. And then we were like, oh, we should have a few different shapes for it. And now when you go onto a dub stage and someone's working, they're invariably working with one of those modes turned on. Now, you can go in and you can edit it manually. If you want to do something specific, you can. But actually removing that need to even sort of worry about your Z really helps.
So essentially, this is a shape.
Exactly, it's a shape inside the room.
A cup or a leading edge or whatever shape. And when you do your XY, instead of it moving just in
moving
a level
flat,
area, it'll follow that curve wherever you put it on.
Exactly, exactly.
All right. And how about for...
Same thing, actually. Well, yeah, for obviously we have a dome mode, so if you don't know what we're talking about, essentially what ends up happening is you have to think of the sound field as literally the top of a ball. So as you move, from left to right or from one side of the room to the other, you're literally going up and over to get to the other side. And obviously there are other modes where you can go through the room or what have you, or have manual control. Obviously Fairlight has very cool options for that, with manual control and so on. I personally like the idea of a tracking tennis ball where you just throw it through the room and the sound follows it. I think someone needs to do that if there's an engineer in the room. Yeah. But yeah, it is actually a very, there are some very clever solutions to it. I mean, even if you think about the way just Pro Tools works right now, it's like it wasn't that long ago that they came up with what you might call Etch-a-Sketch mode, where it only takes 2 knobs to pan left and right and front and back. You literally need 3 knobs to do it in Pro Tools. So it's like, how do you manage that? It's like, so, and that was something they just came up with a solution for just not that long ago. So now adding a Z-axis onto it adds another level of complexity. So,
so Tim, you've been waving your finger about a bit down the hall.
I have, yeah.
And that's a very...
Actually, fundamentally, we're doing, in the simple hardware forms, up and down on a fader. So you have, X, Y, and the thing, and there's just a linear fader. I mean, it could be a knob, but it's a linear fader, and a linear fader gives you that real sense of, up and down. It's away from you or down from you with a zero set in the middle of the fader run. It's actually, it's not quite helicopter pilot stuff, but it's certainly easier than 2 joysticks, which I think is helicopter pilot stuff. We've also just actually we're showing here for the first time. A virtual reality style control, or is similar to sort of a Wii type control, which is done by pointing your finger. So there's an infrared detector that follows your hand. And as you move your hand up in the air, the sound moves up in the air. And as you move your hand down, the sound will move down, or left, right, or front, back. So that's just using. It's working. It's working fine. It's just
it's like positional theremin.
It's a positional theremin. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of getting used to. As you start pointing and the sound doesn't go there, and then you figure out how to point, or the fact that when you bring your hand back, you're not necessarily bringing your hand back perfectly straight up and down. You sort of naturally pull it towards you, so the sound moves further back in the room. But there's those types of adjustment that I think will be fairly quick to learn. But that's a virtual reality style method of positioning sound. It's very, very quick if you decide that a particular sound I want here, and you can just move it to there and then maybe adjust it once it's in its core or raw position later, or fine adjust. So that's another method of up-down control, or Z control.
And I think actually to that point, I mean, one of the cool things that Tim was showing me earlier also that's possible is when you're talking about objects in a three-dimensional field, they're not all mono. You can in fact have stereo, quad, LCR, 5.1 systems in. Then you work in the complexities of moving those around in your object field in a 3D. So there's rotation, there's tilt, there's yaw, there's compressing the 4 or 5 or 6 objects, however many. So I think as we move forward, there will become different methodologies for controlling that type of sound field as well.
Ben, where are you getting Z?
Sorry, just to
ahead,
go back to the when I talk about objects, we're really talking about groups of sounds. An object could be a single sound, or it could be a stereo sound, or a 5.1. And in terms of where my finger points, I'm pointing at what we're affectionately calling the center of gravity. So it's the center of that group of objects, however they happen to be grouped or panned. So that's what I move when I take a 5.1 object or a stereo object and slide it sideways.
So it's almost like you're taking the sweet spot of the mix and moving the sweet spot of the mix to where you're pointing.
Correct. I mean, in a true 5.1 surround, it's the mixer's head.
Right.
And if you like, that we're moving.
But maybe you want to move it over to that guy in the 15th row in the third seat in.
Absolutely correct. And you just move that.
All right. Ben, where are you getting Z?
We do all the above, except for the move your finger around a bit. But I think I've seen almost all the mixers I've watched personally mix recently just use the automated axis deal, because when you think about it, there aren't speakers throughout the middle of the room. So if you really want to pan something, right across the middle, it has to go across the top. There's not, even with as many speakers as Atmos and Auro provide you, that you can't create a phantom image moving, side to side across the room. So 99% of the time, if you're trying to move something like that, you want it to go over the top. And it just isn't, it's really not an issue.
For the true flyover kind of stuff. And just for that.
It's one of those things we really thought up all kinds of ways to do it in the simplest way. The Dolby guys actually led us to water on that one, is keep it simple and just make it arch over the room if that's what they want to do. I mean, you can send it to specific speakers and all kinds of things, but if you're really just trying to fly stuff around the room dynamically, that seems to work great. Okay. And it's easy.
So Sven, the Auro tools are in the same vein?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a traditional guy. I do like the joystick approach, and I do like my knobs to do my panning, I have to say. But we're also looking into having a leap doing I don't know, fancy 3D panning with a hand, or the idea of having a laser pointer with a tracking system, so you point with the laser in the room and it's following and stuff like that. That's interesting, but it needs to fit in the workflow, and the operator needs to, the mixer needs to be able to use it, and it needs to be integrated. And I mean, I can't really picture one of these guys doing something like this in front of their clients. And not now. Yeah. Maybe at some point.
Yeah, when the DJs take over.
Yeah, right.
Be time.
When mixing becomes a performance. I mean, performing art, which is already is, but even with dancing and stuff.
Mark, anything to add on that?
Probably not so much. We basically do we can support joysticks and then either a fader or a knob for height control, but our panners are externally controllable. So as different controllers come out, or different ideas, or if you want to use a MIDI theremin controller, all these things are certainly possible. But Yamaha tends to be a very take a very practical approach on these things, and maybe the tools that you see from us will be very practical.
So the immersive environment in its fullest sense, requiring hardware and RMUs and others in at least in the Dolby case and to a certain extent in others, within the environment of the workflow where projects are moving around and pieces are moving back and forth. And if you went into the mix, this was kind of conceived as a mastering stage item, but sometimes things are still moving and going back and forth. How much of the consistency of the workflow can actually be maintained? And I know, Ben, I was going to let you, because I know you and
Yeah.
Mark have been working together on a way of addressing that, at least within those environments.
Thank you very much for asking. Yeah, this is really cool.
Thank you very much for feeding me the question by email.
We are working with Nuendo. We partnered up with Nuendo to take the X, Y, and Z position that we generate in the console, and we've made an exchange format that we can take that X, Y, and Z information that the mixer has used with our console, and they can import that into Nuendo, and then do further conforming and auditioning. The cool thing about that is if you take it out of this room, well, if you're in the room next door, you have Atmos speakers, for example, and you may make the mix in Atmos, but when you take it back to editorial, you may only have 5.1 speakers, or you may have an Auro speaker setup, for example, which would be the closest analogy you could get, probably. And so with the Nuendo system that we got set up, you can make the mix here, take the X, Y, and Z position and apply it to your Nuendo session, and hear that over the Auro speakers, and then bring it back into the dubbing stage, and all the conforming that you've done in the Nuendo session appears back on the console so that you can pick it up from there. And we just demoed that technology about, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago here at Sony, and that's been a pretty big hit. That's been really interesting, yeah. And so I guess you could almost call that sort of a precursor to MDA. I mean, we could use the MDA file format for that. I could certainly see how that might make sense. One thing I don't understand, and maybe you can answer this, is I keep hearing MDA talked about as a delivery format. Is there anything that makes it only a delivery format, or could that be this interchange format?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the entire concept behind MDA is that, again, it's sort of sound system agnostic. That's not what we're selling as a sound system. Obviously, this is an immersive audio forum, but that being said, MDA is not inherently immersive audio. The idea being is that it is an interoperable format that can be delivered and used by anything and created by anything. That's the entire concept, is to have more tools to be played back in more venues on more sound systems more correctly than you currently can. So the idea of the object-based delivery could be used, obviously, with PCM. That's currently the way we're delivering it for cinema use, and obviously for mix use, and hopefully for home use at some point, and so on. But there's nothing preventing you from using just the object data itself as an interoperable...
As an interim step in the production, yeah.
So I can just address that just very quickly. So certainly MDA could very easily be a mezzanine format that moves for the purpose you just suggested.
That would be
It
awesome.
would.
I'll work on that.
Well, it already does it. It does it now. It's got the metadata, it's got the positional information for every object, and it embeds the objects as PCM, so you can move them backwards and forwards very simply.
I mean, we can do that kind of thing now with the RMU in the middle. We can take XYZ data, and it goes to the RMU, and the RMU sort of bounces it out to Pro Tools. I mean, you can do these things. Or you can copy the automation from the Pro Tools plugin down to the XY knobs on Pro Tools. But it's all just a lot of steps, So what we're doing with these guys is it just takes away all the steps. You take the fader moves, X, Y, and Z position, you print them onto their session, they do work on it, they do things, and then they bring it back in. And it's a very infant technology. We're just kind of investigating these kind of things. I think we need to talk further about the file formats and things, but it looks like that's how things have got to happen. If we're going to make any progress and make this workflow start to work, there's going to have to be some interchange like that. So we're pretty close. That's good.
It would be great to have some kind of interchange format for this. I mean, from a practical point of view, we are doing this all the time. I mean, it's not a secret that there are many movies out there which have been mixed in Atmos and in Auro. and we are not in it to make it more complicated. So we kind of have an exchange format using the Atmos pan information in Auro and the other way around. That's already there.
Okay. Now that, just the XYZ is kind of a microset of what panning can be as well, because you can pan and get distance effect and that sort of thing with the panning, convergence, divergence, and distance, all of the variables that can work into that. If that sound effect that's just behind your head and you want you want somebody to walk past you, yeah, those kind of things.
If we're talking about standards,
Yes.
the other thing
Well, again.
that's really frustrating is you just mentioned it: divergence versus size versus distance. Everybody calls it something different, but it has to be pretty much the same thing.
It should be spread in orbit. That's it.
Spread, yeah, exactly. Spread.
I'm pretty sure size is the right way to go.
Didn't include spread. So I mean, there are different ways to talk about these things, but we all know that they have to be fundamentally similar. I mean, unless you're doing something like the EOSONA stuff, where you're really setting up distances and wavefront synthesis, which none of us. I mean, I think we've kind of had to move beyond that in the sense that it didn't really work for fast-moving stuff in real-life movies, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, that was the whole thing. Had EOSONA, like when I was there, we obviously it's specific to that format, but again, like what Dolby's doing and what MDA is doing and so on, like the object-based mixing was really a big part of what that system was. And obviously there was a lot of metadata specific to that sound system. So like, yeah, obviously what we're more looking toward now is a more universal format that kind of works for everyone. And to that point, exactly what you're saying, what is the difference between spread and divergence? It's like what is, yaw, or what, there's all these other like functions that could be done in an immersive sound system that that we don't want to make it more complicated for the end user.
Right.
We just want to make it more useful to them.
And that, so I'm kind of looking to see where some bottlenecks are here. People who are going out and implementing this, we've got it now. We're starting to figure it out. We're seeing the result. And what are these guys at Sony coming back and saying, could you just do this?
Where to begin? No, I mean, I think just in that conversation, we've touched on a number of topics that we could probably talk for hours on. There are a lot of bottlenecks. There are a lot of touch points. I mean, I think the whole like exchange of metadata, all of that stuff is really interesting. We've worked with all the third parties to be able to record metadata in and out, because as re-recording mixers, you've traditionally recorded audio from one place to another. Now, as you start moving to metadata being a part of this, you need to be able to re-record the audio and the metadata from one machine to another. So how does that work? How do you take things from editorial where they may have generated metadata? How do you get that on the stage? How does that flow through the system? And then, as these guys said, I think we're in the infancy of that, and I think we're all kind of learning that. It's kind of interesting to hear that there's this Nuendo file-based workflow. I'd love to learn some more about that, because I think moving towards more of a file-based workflow is certainly important. And I think the interesting thing is around the sort of standardized file format. We at Dolby are very actively involved in that whole SMPTE work as well, and I think it's in everyone's best interest for some standards to emerge out of all of this. But at the same time, I don't think any of us want to sit around and wait for that to happen, because we've got movies to put out there, and so it's a case of finding that balance between actually making progress and then finding the standardized exchange format. And then in terms of bottlenecks, wow. I mean, really, where to begin? I think that, again, is inherent in where we are in the technology. So much of what we've done over the years, I think in the abstract of this session, it talks about, the width of things. So much equipment is built around 8 wide stems. The ability to record 8 tracks, the ability to transfer 8 tracks, and suddenly we're trying to break out of that. Track counts, channel counts, processing counts, all of that goes up quite a lot. This is a much bigger leap than, say, going from 5.1 to 7.1. So that's certainly an area. Interchange is definitely an area. Translation from room to room. People, all you guys, all you mixers, you've learned over the years how a room will translate to a bigger room, to a smaller room, to a different set of speakers, to all of this stuff. there's a lot of new learning that has to happen around how things translate from room to room and what works and what doesn't. One thing that may work in an immersive format in one room, you take it to a different room and suddenly you're like, oh, wow, that isn't what I intended at all. And so I think some of it's technology, some of it's learning, but I think there are just so many touch points that, everything's got to change. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Anything you can think of bottleneck-wise that you're working on?
I can almost only think of bottlenecks. Because this isn't obviously just a Dolby DTS Barco thing. It's not simply a Fairlight Nuendo Avid thing or a Harrison Neve Euphonics SSL thing. There's a lot of moving parts involved, and there's a lot of styles of mixing, and there's a lot of different types of content being created. If we can all agree on where even to go to lunch, then maybe we'll agree on a format to go with. So obviously there are a lot of moving parts, but I think the long and short of it is, the fact that a panel like this exists and that immersive audio is becoming more popular. I'm a firm believer that, what's the phrase, a rising tide raises all ships.
Right.
So the fact that this is happening at all is kind of incredible. Having worked on movies for 20 years, I'm constantly impressed that any movie gets made. The fact that it can be made with 58 channels in the other room is a modern miracle. So obviously we're just in the infancy of this, and there's a lot of issues being worked out. But obviously, Dolby's had a huge amount of success just in a very short period of time, making a lot of movies and making, just from the previous panel, making a lot of mixers very happy.
Yeah. Well, what we've got is new technology for these guys, new tools, new creatives, and we've got an appreciable result for the end user. Now we have to just iron out all the different ways that we can do that and make it smooth.
And I think that's a really important point. I think, there is a certain amount of there's a pain threshold that people are willing to put up with if the benefits outweigh the downsides. And that will last for some period of time. And I think in this initial surge, the creative benefits really have outweighed some of the potential stumbling blocks and bottlenecks that we're talking about. That won't last forever, and we do need to iron that out, and we need to work as a whole sort of community and a whole industry to work through some of those bottlenecks. But I think that the creative benefits that this bring allow us to deal with some of that and give us the leeway to sort that out.
I might just comment. Thank you.
I'm done.
You're done. My battery's out. To go back to the bottleneck thing, I think we're at a point where we're introducing an entirely new model. The point that David just made was that we had this 8-track block, or even before that, and a 6-track block in terms of the way of thinking of things, and then we have bus formats in terms of 5.1 or 7.1 or whatever the history's been, or before that LCR. Now with objects, or an object-oriented approach, to all intents and purposes, that all goes out the window, or potentially all goes out the window, and it's a question of transitioning from the historic and established model to where we might be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years downstream. We still hold the concept of reels, roughly being 10 minutes, and we still hold the concept of stems, being 5.1 or 6-track stems. Well, a 6-track stem in object-oriented terms really starts to lose the meaning that it had before, because we could now deliver a 13.1 stem, or we could now deliver, just tracks with metadata. So the transition in the mixing environment and the transition to a new model, which is sometimes painful, and sometimes you just go incrementally. You hang on to a part of it. In fact, the Dolby format, in a way, is hanging on to a 9.1 bed, and then the rest of it's objects. At some point, potentially, it's all objects. So those steps and how we go through them, I think there's a lot to be learned, and there's a lot to be poured into the workflow.
With the RMU, we've essentially got a router in simple terms with some DSP in the middle, and that DSP actually processes and remaps the output, kind of thing.
Right.
But that is physically required in some form, but for repro at every point, and mixes have to pass through it sequentially too. You can't
Right now, yeah, a mix passes through it in real time. I mean, I think this sort of leads on to what I think is probably from my point of view, the biggest issue that we're facing, which is around the realities of the deliverables that come out of all of this. I think if all we had to do was make a kick-ass domestic theatrical mix, this would all be much easier. But that's not that's not the reality of the situation. The reality, and this came up in the panel we just had, that suddenly you now need 2 weeks at the end of your mix to go through and make all the deliverables you need to make. And I'm guessing that's not what you wake up in the morning wanting to do. So I think, trying to solve for some of the realities of what we do rather than necessarily just focusing on, that single theatrical domestic mix, which is really important to focus on, but focusing more on, the other things that you have to deliver is important. One of the things that I think the RMU offers, which is good, just based on what you were saying about it being a router, is you can actually generate multiple channel-based stems simultaneously out of the back of that at the same time as you're generating your Atmos mix. So in a single pass, you can actually generate your Atmos print master along with a 7-1 mix of it, a 5-1 mix of it, a 5-1 mix of your dialogue objects, a 7-1 mix of your dialogue objects, on and on and on through the second 64 outputs. And it's not perfect. It's still a system that we're developing and iterating on, but doing everything we can to try and improve that deliverable side of this business to mean that it's not adding 2 weeks at the end of a mix to generate those deliverables is, I think, really important. It's not glamorous, but it's important.
Yeah, Ben, you've addressed some of that with the folks here. Again, what you added on with the new core is essentially, again, a huge router with processing and such in the middle to make that possible, if that's a simplification. But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And really, in many ways, things are easier for us because we're not tied to a computer or a DAW or anything. We make a box that does what it says on the tin. It's luckily we don't have as many some of the issues that come up when you're talking about being a plug-in and trying to work your way around, the limitations of the DAW. For example, you have to a typical track has 1 or 2 outputs or something, but you want to mix to a 12-wide output. You've got to come up with workarounds and those kind of things, whereas a console just does that kind of stuff. So we have some advantages in that way. Just going back to your earlier question about what are the bottlenecks?
yes.
For us, things are looking pretty rosy. I mean, this is exactly this is really what we are built to do all along. Is to sit in between all these boxes and all the plugins and all the things. It's exactly what we do. So this is wonderful for us. It's been a great new technology, and the best thing about it is it's for big rooms because you can't fit 64 speakers in a little room,
Right.
and it's about theaters. So this is really great, cool, exciting stuff.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
And as opposed to what, 5 months ago, you can't walk on the factory floor now, right?
That's
Is that
right.
what Gary
Yeah,
was
we're
saying?
crawling under and over consoles right now. Yeah, to get around. Yeah.
I do want to, I've got other notes here and other questions we can go to, but I did want to open it up too as well. If anyone in the audience has questions that they want to ask these guys, please flag my attention, and we can do that. But we've got some other topics to talk about too. So, anyone have a question at the moment? Anything that they want to ask of these guys? Hardware, technology, formats, workflow.
What do you think is the potential for the consumer market of these formats? I mean, obviously, it's the goal. Obviously, we'd love everybody to have a great system in their home, but are you guys marketing that way, or what's the...
I'll jump in. I think there's huge potential of these formats. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. Atmos works, speaking specifically about Dolby Atmos, it works incredibly well in big rooms, and in the sort of cinematic experience is a really wonderful thing with Dolby Atmos. And I don't think you're ever going to necessarily recreate that in the home. You're not going to get that sense of space. You're not going to be able to watch Gravity in your house and have that sort of awe-inspiring size of screen, life-changing experience. But
you still can have a receiver that says Atmos on it.
Right, but...
And that's all that's necessary,
and that's all
right?
And that is all that really matters. No. But you can get a more immersive experience in the home than we have today. I think a couple of interesting things about, the concept of an object-based format, and, Brian can talk to this as well, is the idea of scalability and being much more agnostic to where speakers are positioned. The fact that, if you go into most consumers' homes, even if they think they've got a 5.1 system, they've probably got like a surround speaker here and then one behind a plant pot over there somewhere.
Or 5 of them just on top of the TV.
Right, exactly. Or,
Hey, 5 speakers, one for 5
one of
different rooms in
them's
the
got a
house.
finger poked through one of the cones, and and some people have a great system, and it's fine. But one of the nice things about reproduction of an object-based mix is you can be a lot more flexible with where you put your speakers. As long as you tell the renderer where those speakers are, you can give a much better representation of that artistic mix. And the other thing that all of these formats give that is the easiest thing for a consumer to grasp onto is the concept of overhead speakers and sound coming from above you. There's probably a pretty small group of people who are going to be allowed to install overhead speakers in there.
Mark Fishman.
Right, but there are but there are some, absolutely, and that's wonderful. Good on them. Pretty lights solve everything. And so one of the things that Dolby's been working on, sorry, this is a bit of a pitch, is some Dolby-enabled speaker technology, which are modules that can sit on top of standard home consumer speakers and have some clever filtering and some clever processing in the AVR that actually will bounce off the ceiling and give you a more immersive experience without needing to install overhead speakers. And I think some of you in the room have probably listened to that and had a demo of it, and it's a really quite impressive representation of this mix, knowing that the reality of having a 50-foot ceiling in someone's living room isn't really there. Having a way of generating an Atmos-like experience, an immersive experience in the home is really possible and is a really exciting new possibility.
Yeah, and there will be a deliverable there, and there's also the headphone technology that is being explored for that. That's not quite ready for yet. There was an announcement this week on the speaker system and such, and a tease for the headphone, I believe.
There's a bunch of technology, there's a bunch of interesting stuff, and there's a bunch of ways that you can take these mixes and present them to a consumer in a really compelling and differentiated
And the
way.
headphone methodology then would become portable also for mobile devices and more people listening to music on iPads and those sorts of things if you can get into that point. How about DTS for that?
Well, I was going to say more as a general point of an object-based mix, but Dolby DTS, MDA, Sono, any of these, the idea being is that once you have this audio attached to metadata, there's really nothing you can't do with it once you have it. Obviously it's very attractive to the cinema, it's attractive to home theater delivery, it's attractive for music and all sorts of other venues. Just having a single deliverable, being able to do things like swap out an object and suddenly have Spanish instead of English, or swap out an object and have a documentary or a commentary instead of your main source. Be able to allow the user some control over the differentiation between dialogue and effects. Rather than simply having dialogue normalization compressing the whole thing, you could say like, well, okay, let me actually just raise up the dialogue slightly. So there are very compelling technical reasons to go with an object-based mix over and above the immersive quality of it.
Sven, I saw in AS Berlin, I saw a very effective home system
Yeah,
demo of a very affordable by
Right.
sub-audiophile standards. Let's say it's not a $15,000 system, but maybe $1,500.
That's just the beginning thing. It was important we've always been open about the idea that we want to deploy this into home theater as well. We use the same fundamental technology that we use in digital cinema for the home environment as well. For us, it's important to keep the consistency of the product and bring it into whatever environment and make sure that the artistical intent is still there. And so the first products we've been introducing at CES, and we have a bunch of manufacturers signed up, and they will bring products to the market with Auro-3D technology on there. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Anyone else have anything right now? Over there, Tom. Yes, second from the end against the console.
All right, this question will be in reference to acoustical shadows. If you have a person at the front end of the screen and you have somebody behind him, and the person in the foreground is blocking the person behind them, are you in fact accommodating, aside from the traditional, let's roll off some presence on the voice behind that person, are you taking into account in the mixing parameters the ability to create an acoustical shadow, like somebody's in front of somebody, somebody's behind a tree or next to a tree, where you're having not only the circle around, but you also have the depth from front to back taken into account?
I mean, I would say in general, given the, I mean, unless somebody wants to correct me, the technology we're using here doesn't really encompass that sort of thing. I mean, that was something we were playing with at EOSono. It was called distance-based volume and EQ and so on like that. But no, that's, I mean, that would be really more of an artistic intent, you know, and that's going to be something that's like much harder to do.
I'm thinking more in perspective, even more specific. Let's say there's 3 trees across the screen, left, center, center, right, center. Somebody's running across screaming. What we would hear in real life is that the tree would be blocking that person's voice to some degree for just an instant as they're running. So it wouldn't be an artistic thing, that would be a perspective issue.
But I was going to say, that's still a mix of decision, how to actually do that, and I think there are artistic elements to that. You know, we're not trying to replace a mixer at that point. You know, like, I think all of us can agree that we looked a lot at, you know, different things outside of the room, panning, being able to do more distance-based things, you know, integrating Doppler effects into movements. But certainly from I think, Dolby's point of view, it was much more about, you know what, those sort of, again, I think we do characterize those as creative decisions. It's not really our place to try and impose those. We want to, you know, do the right thing algorithmically and let you decide what the audio content should be.
I think the simple answer is no, that's not inherently part of the system.
Anybody else? Any question from the audience? Okay. I wanted to ask one, and if someone else has one, flag and stuff, and I'll look around a little bit. But at the theater level, now Dolby's obviously got the penetration there. There's Auro theaters are being set up now. Are there, what Auro theaters are out? How many theaters?
I don't
can
know the
accommodate?
specific number, but I think we have up to 200 installations in North America. Well,
Okay.
they are labeled Barco because that's our partner in digital cinema, and worldwide. I don't want to lie, I think it's up to 400 by the end of the year or something.
Okay. What I'm curious about is how consistent are the consumer experiences from theater to theater now that you're starting to see some installations in, and you're finding different speakers, different levels of competencies, different size rooms. We already talked about maybe moving something from one room that worked to another room where it didn't work. What are you finding in those regards, and how can those be addressed so the consumer can say, oh, well, I'm going to an Auro-3D and I know it's going to be good enough. I know Dolby had theater licensing and such plans in years past, THX standards and stuff. Tom Holman, the TH and TXHX, just left the room. But
did we offend him?
I think we chased him away. He knew I was going to ask that question. So anyway, what are you finding as far as consistency?
Obviously we are putting in any effort to make sure that the consistency throughout the theaters is well, on its highest level, obviously. There's no point in coming up with a system like this and then having it messed up in a theater by someone who is not really knowing what he's doing. So I think we have a bit less of an issue with it because we just have less channels. It might be a bit more complicated when it comes to 64 channels. But you guys have quite a piece of technology to make sure that this is the case as well.
Well,
so
to put a point on, what does every effort mean? I mean, are you physically going to are you doing measurements? Are you
of course. I mean, when there is an Auro room being set up, then Barco is going in there with a team of specialists to make sure that this room is set up to the best possible standards. In that case, it's Auro is responsible for the post-production side of things, while Barco is, well, they license our technology for digital cinema, and they're responsible for doing the theater side of things. But obviously, we work closely together, and it's our specification that they are trying to implement.
To answer your question, I mix in the format, for example, in Auro, I find myself going out and checking my mixes like I would in any format at the local theaters, regardless of who makes it. When we did 5.1, you'd always go out and check what's going on. The idea is, as a mixer, is you want to make sure that your work translates regardless of the format and or the room. And just like everything, experiences in theaters, regardless of the format, varies from room to room. And when you do find one that works well, that plays back your artistic vision, you find that you go to that theater more often than not. So it varies, just like all exhibitions.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's all good points. You know, on the Dolby Atmos system, we've set the bar pretty high with quality, and we're sticking to that. You know, quality is really key to the Atmos system. It's our promise to the creative community that, you know, we've put this system out there and we're going to deliver this quality when it's played back. So we have a team of folks who do plan reviews for any new Atmos installation going in, and we'll use our equalization software. We have a Dolby Atmos Designer software, which is our EQ software, which goes through and equalizes and configures the room. So every Dolby Atmos room that gets installed does go through a pretty intense commissioning service and a design review before it even gets installed. So in that respect, you know, we know that things will play back consistently, you know, as consistently as they can. You know, geometries and things get in the way. Different speakers are gonna sound different. You know, we hope those differences are minimal, but fundamentally, you know, we try and make that translation as accurate as possible.
I was going to say, though I agree with the disembodied voice, yes. I think one of the nice things about actually that's really brought the entire level of the cinema experience up are systems like Atmos and Auro, because you find that more and more cinemas are putting in more of their prime rooms. And obviously putting one and or both of the systems in those rooms. So I think it's the overall user experience is coming up, both as part of the movie-going experience and possibly because of the existence of these systems.
One more over here.
Yeah, it seems that we've gone so far behind. Sorry. It seems that we've gone so far beyond n number 0.1 that there's like 5 through 13.1. And I remember in the earlier days of AC3 encoding, it would be like 3/2/1 or something like that. And it seems like we need to do something like that, because if you have like an Auro, it would be 3, maybe parentheses 3/2/2, or 4, you know, that you could somehow, because we're so far
People
beyond.
People think they need to do a formula to walk into the room.
No, but 9.1, 11.1, or 13, you know, 7.1 means two different things. It could mean SDDS, it could mean, you know, all these things mean that in describing the beds, which are going to become more and more complicated, we need something that really can be translated into reality, you know, just for standardization of syntax. I don't know.
Yeah, just to make things worse, even at Dolby, we've got 2 different ways of describing speaker layouts. And in the consumer world, we're sort of doing something similar, where we're talking about a 714 configuration or a 916 configuration, where you talk about the floor, the low frequency extension, and then, you know, number of overhead speakers. And so you'll hear quite a few people starting to talk about things like 714, which is a traditional 7.1 plus 4 overheads. So I agree, it is confusing. And so the more we can get away from number-based arms race, the better.
My question goes back to the metadata quandrum and going from room to room and figuring that out. Isn't it, maybe I misunderstood, but isn't there technology that can read the room, that you mix the film in, put it in metadata, carry that mix with the metadata. When you build the room, you take a picture of that room and it compares it to where it was mixed and it optimizes that room for that mix. Isn't that possible?
Well, I think as a general concept, that's essentially what's happening with the object-based systems, because what you're doing is you're defining a speaker configuration for a room that you're mixing in. So, for instance, next door, there's, I believe Bill Benier told me there's 58 speakers, of which, you know, Dolby's using 46, or is he?
It's like an acoustical fingerprint of a room and then apply this to a mix. In theory, that's probably possible, but I'm not sure if this would work out. I mean, there are so many elements that influence an acoustic of a room. That's not always something you can just correct with a filter or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's currently...
it's certainly an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's currently a standards committee working on the whole idea of the X-curve and 202M and how your rooms are analyzed. And obviously, you know, I think all the sound systems are trying to abide by, you know, current standard practices, you know, as far as the way rooms are tuned and created and placement of speakers and all of that. But as far as what I was talking about is more just the discrete position of the sound. But as far as the character of the room, I think obviously impulse responses and could be done of the room. So I don't think that's really, you know, terribly practical. I'm not sure how that'd be worked in. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think, you know, getting speaker positioning and getting them EQ'd and tuned to as close a known, you know, curve as possible is the best we can do at this point. And, you know, as you say, the acoustical characteristics of a room are not something that is easy to take into account. I mean, you are acoustically measuring the frequency response of the speakers, so in that respect, it is taking some of the acoustical characteristics of the room into account. But there are things within a room that might not be taken into account.
There's some very expensive boxes that have done that very impressive for headphones, where they'll take a print and this you sit there with headphones and you know that sounds like that 5.1 system when you're sitting in the center in that room, and it can even move with your head and such. But it's
trying to apply that to a lot of speakers.
That's a lot of processing to apply to that. I think in theory what you're saying actually can be done, and it's a proven that it can be done. Whether anyone is actually going to consider it practical is probably not going to be true for a while. Would be my guess on that. Okay, I want to thank these. Go ahead, Tim. Sure, absolutely.
I think perhaps part of the conversation earlier about metadata was not so much metadata in the deliverable to the theater, but metadata in the post-production process. How we're moving through the various stages, and if you have to mix some element or some elements of or some reels in this room, and then you have to go to the next room in the same building, how the metadata moves along with the mix, rather than what we do when we do it when it becomes part of a deliverable. That in itself is happening on some level, but it's not a flawless process at this time. It's a what do we call it? It's work in progress.
There we go. All right. So, Mark, Sven, Ben, Tim, Brian, David. Let's give these guys a big hand of applause. Thank them for having us here today.
Frank, if you'd all...
And for being with us here today.